heard of the quintessential Australian stories and folklore? We've decided to share some of the lesser-known tales. These are the kind of tales that interest us. And if you're interested in the history of Australia, the more obscure stories about places and people you may not have heard of, then stay tuned and enjoy this new series, Aussie Tales That You Weren't Taught. In this episode, we take a look at the fascinating life of Louisa Lawson. We've no doubt all been taught about Henry Lawson, Australian short story writer and poet. No doubt we will feature him in an upcoming episode in the not too distant future. But for now, how many of us have heard about his mother? I was never taught about Louisa Lawson. I just assumed Henry's mum was a homemaker like so many other women for the time. Well, no, she was much more. You'd be lucky if you'd been taught about her. If not, let's delve into the mid-1800s when Louisa was born, in Australia too. Louisa Aubrey was born in the February of 1848. She would have just turned 177 last month, near the town of Golgong, New South Wales, at a station working farm called Guntawang. Golgong is located 300 kilometres northwest of Sydney, just 30 kilometres north of Mudgee. To English-born parents, Henry Aubrey and Harriet Wynne. Louisa was the second of 12 children in a struggling family. Henry had migrated to Australia with his family at 13 in September of 1838 aboard the Woodbridge. Harriet also from England on board the Lady Kennaway, arriving in Sydney in the October of 1841 with her sister Emma Sophia Wynne. Both Louisa's parents ended up in Sydney, and they married on the 4th of February 1845 in Mulgoa near Penrith. They moved to where the work was, both living and working on the Guntawang station, built 1825, a property owned by the Rouse family. The family mostly had girls, and only 2 of the 12 were boys. The town population grew rapidly from 1850 with gold rush fever. Louisa attended Mudgee National School, where the headmaster, J.W. Allpass, proposed making her a pupil teacher. However, she was kept home to care for the younger children, a task she resented. On the 7th of July of 1866, at the Wesleyan Parsonage in Mudgee, Louisa, 18, married Niels Hertzberg Larsen, 34, a Norwegian man who called himself Peter. This may be because his father was named Peter Larsen and grandfather was named Lars. Much like the Old Welsh, they followed a surname made up of the father's name, such as Peterson or son of Peter, Larsen or son of Lars. Peter sounded more English than Niels. They must have met in Mudgee Township, but what an age gap. Louisa probably saw it as her ticket out of the crowded family home. Peter was a handyman and gold digger, fluent in several European languages, and a teetotaler, meaning he didn't drink alcohol. He must have been interesting enough for Louisa to give up living at home and her youth. They joined the Weddon Mountain Gold Rush and later selected 40 acres or 16 hectares at Urundari. By the time of their son Henry's birth in 1867, they had anglicised the spelling of Larsen to Lawson. Between 1867 and 1877, Louisa gave birth to 5 children. Peter was often away, either at the goldfields or working on construction projects with his father-in-law, Henry Aubrey. Meanwhile, Louisa took in sewing, sold dairy produce, and fattened cattle. She was also an expert four-in-hand driver, meaning pulling a wagon of 4 horses. The women in her family believed that she'd served as the inspiration for the hard-working, resourceful, kindly and long-suffering bushwoman who appear in Henry's stories. The Lawsons joined a Mudgee spiritualist group, although Louisa had a strict Methodist upbringing and ceased attending church. She remained deeply religious. When she and her children moved to Sydney in 1883, she found friends through the Progressive Spiritualist Lyceum at Lee House. She maintained a pretense of being separated from her husband by misfortune, but the marriage had actually ended. Long distance, heaven knows how often they saw each other. 5 kids in 10 years. Peter sent money irregularly to help support the children, and Louisa even considered taking legal action. But instead she took in sewing, washing and boarders to the home. In 1887, she bought the ailing Republican newspaper. Despite not completing a full schooling, her father Henry Aubrey was a great storyteller, and Louisa and then Henry shared in that talent. Her poetry, inspired by the death of her infant daughter, had been published in the Mudgee Independent News. Louisa and son Henry edited and wrote most of the Republican under the pen name Archie Lawson for editorial purposes. In 1888, Louisa started Dawn magazine, announcing that it would publicise women's wrongs, fight their battles and sue for their suffrage. The publication offered household advice, fashion, poetry, a short story, and extensive reporting of women's activities, both locally and overseas. Louisa added a political editorial on the importance of the Divorce Extension Bill to women. Dawn was an immediate commercial success. On the 31st of December 1888, Peter died, leaving £1,103 to Louisa. She used the money to enlarge her printing plant and began accepting job printing. By 1889, Mrs. Lawson was employing 10 women, including female printers. Throughout the Dawn magazine's 17 years, it also urged women a public vote. It also put a light on domestic violence, something her son Henry would be faced with himself. In 1889, Louisa Lawson launched the campaign for female suffrage and announced the formation of the Dawn Club, where women from all walks of life could meet to discuss issues of life, work and reform. The club also provided a space for women to gain experience in public speaking, enabling them to campaign effectively for their rights. In 1900, she was thrown from a tram, suffering a fractured knee and spine injury that took over a year to recover. By 1902, she was active politically again and resumed her campaign on the Council of the Women's Progressive Association to secure the appointment of women to public office. Louisa Lawson's relentless efforts bore fruit in 1902 when women in New South Wales gained the right to vote. Australia became the first country in the world to grant both women and men the right to vote in federal elections and the right to be elected to Parliament on a national basis. While New Zealand was the first to grant women the right to vote in 1893, Australia's achievement was significant in giving women the opportunity to stand for election as well. Women argued that their wishes should be reflected in Parliament as laws affected them just as much as men. Louisa Lawson and a handful of other women activists led Australia to female suffrage, changing the country in a significant way. At the celebratory meeting after women were enfranchised in New South Wales in 1902, she was publicly acclaimed as the originator of the suffrage campaign. But also following that accident in 1900, Louisa lost some of that vitality and inventiveness that had made Dawn a success. Her friend Mrs. Todd, who had been one of her journalists, remember her as so full of original ideas that she always seemed to have plenty to spare for others. Novelties disappeared from Dawn, and there were fewer lively short paragraph news items. Advertising declined and Dawn closed in 1905. Afterwards, Louisa lived in increasingly impoverished and lonely circumstances. What happened to her children? She secured a publisher for 2 volumes of verse and sold a few poems and short stories. She enjoyed her garden where she planted native plants. Her Dolly Dear poems captured the humour and warmth of the old women's love for children. Louisa died in the Hospital for the Insane, Gladesville, on the 12th of August 1920. She had been living alone before being admitted in 1918, her memory failing, but still strong-willed. It was possibly dementia setting in. She was buried with the Methodist rites in the Anglican section of Rookwood Cemetery. Her estate, valued for probate at £629, was left to one of her sons, Peter, who was the father of 9 of her beloved grandchildren. Gosh, no wonder he couldn't take her in. Henry, her oldest son, dies only a few years after Louisa. Her other sons live for another 20 years, and her daughter Gertrude, who, it's speculated, looked after the Dawn newspaper after Louisa's tram accident, also had a quite tumultuous life herself, with several husbands. It is strange that she lived on her own, but that may have been how she liked it. Australia has memorialised Louisa Lawson. In Marrickville, there's the Louisa Lawson Reserve. In Canberra, they have the Louisa Lawson Building. And in Bondi, Louisa Place on Brighton Boulevard in North Bondi. And Mudgee, as of a few years ago, has their very own statue of Louisa Lawson in their township. Louisa had a fascinating life. Her strong disposition through hardship, looking after her kids by herself and fighting for women's rights. Another example of a role model for young women today. She made the most of the time she had. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We enjoyed looking into Louisa Lawson. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you're aware when we're posting more Aussie tales you weren't taught.